Welcome to the next episode of Real Stories Leadership Series for the Canadian real estate industry. I'm your host, Ryan Ram from Matrix360, and we are excited to collaborate with Informa Canada to deliver a platform for leaders to share their experiences. The intent of our dialogue series is to engage with business leaders as they share their insights and wisdom. Before we commence, a little tidbit about us, Matrix360. We're an advisory platform that bridges the human experience with business innovation. It is with great privilege and responsibility that we partner and advocate for people in the real estate industry. Today we are here at the RealReader in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we are honored to be joined by Heather Kirk, who is a member of the Board of Trustees for Cominar REIT and Minto Apartment REIT, and previously Managing Director of Equity Research at BMO Capital Markets. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. And so we'll jump into the conversation. Could you please tell us a little bit about the work that you currently do and why it matters to you?
I've had a bit of a career transition recently. I left my role as Managing Director of REIT Equity Research at BMO in the spring, and joined the boards of Minto and Cominar REIT, so transitioning into a more operating kind of, well, not really operating, but board type of role. I also spent half of my career in investment banking and also have owned some real estate assets on the side, so I've done a little bit of everything and looking for the next steps.
And has this transition been for you? Has it been
exciting? It's been very exciting because it was a very fast-paced environment that I was working in, and so it's been a little bit slower, so that's been a bit of an adjustment, but it's been nice to take a breath and to be able to kind of reflect on things and think about the next steps in my career.
Awesome. And now taking a little bit of a look back at your career journey so far leading up to now, can you recall something that you did that in retrospect has had a positive impact on who you are today?
On who I am today? Well, I think, so much of my career has had a positive impact. It's been, I think choosing to be in the REIT space has been really interesting, and a lot of, I think, where you end up in your career can happen by accident. I didn't know anything about real estate when I got into it, but I liked it, so I stuck with it, and it was a growing industry. So I think really the first and foremost, picking the real estate space and the REIT space definitely had a positive impact and allowed me to have a lot of diverse roles within the industry.
Awesome. What would be kind of through that search process of where you got to now, could you share with us a memorable or impactful lesson that you've learned that's really helped to shape your journey so far?
I mean, there's been so many lessons along the way, but I think if anything, stepping back is to cut yourself some slack and show yourself some compassion. I think when you're a driven, motivated person, it's easy to be really hard on yourself and self-critical. And I think that that over the course of time, I think that being as easy on yourself as you, or treating yourself the way you would like the way you treat others is a good way to ensure some balance.
Isn't it interesting how hard that can be to show that compassion and care to yourself? Well, it's great that you've taken this time now to try to bring that all together and take a bit of time for yourself in your new transition. In terms of mentorship, has there ever been someone that you've looked up to for guidance or leadership professionally that have helped you progress through your career? And what is a piece of advice that they've given you?
I can't say that there's been one specific mentor that's been the sole person who's had influence on me. And I look at it and I believe that, there've been some senior people that I've crossed paths with along the way that have really helped me push myself. I think sometimes people around you who are more senior see more in you than you do in yourself, and that can give you that energy and confidence to stretch and to take some risks. And I think you evolve in a career by taking those stretch goals and taking some risks and taking a shot at seeing how things play out. So I did have a few people who, a woman I worked with when I was at National Bank Financial who was a big supporter and pushed me. And I think that always stuck with me to take some risks and see how those pay off. But I also think that mentorship doesn't only come from, your boss or someone senior. I also think that people that you start out with as peers are also people that you can learn from. And I would say that a lot of the people I've worked with throughout my career have gone on to be friends, and I've learned a lot from my peers as well.
So you're saying both formal and informal types of mentorship?
Yes, and I think that's a great distinction, because I did actually have the opportunity through Women in Capital Markets to have some formal mentorship, and that was great. I did some coaching, which I can say honestly, I was a very big skeptic about doing coaching. You know, coming from the high-paced environment I was in, I thought that was a little bit fluffy, and I was proven absolutely wrong, and I think that was a fantastic experience, and I think anybody who has the opportunity to do any kind of that coaching, it's so valuable and really, really helpful as you progress through your career.
Oh, that's awesome. You had such a great experience with it. If you could go back in time to mentor your 20-year-old self, what are some critical pieces of advice that you would give them? And maybe this touches on...
This might be a really long conversation, because there's a lot of things I would have done differently. You know what? Number one, I'm going to say, cut yourself some slack. You know, fail, be humble, and ask for help. And I think that when you're junior, sometimes you think you have to have all the answers. So reaching out for help, I think, is a good thing, and being humble and not afraid to admit when you've made mistakes. We learn the most from our mistakes. So as long as we don't make them repeatedly, that's good. I think have a sense of humor too. I guess maybe that's just my bias. I'm hard on myself, so learning to not take things so seriously and is a helpful lesson. I also think that networking is really critical. You know, I think that people, I always believed that if I just worked harder, that was what was going to get me ahead. And for sure, early on in your career, being the person who's got good technical skills and, is on the ball and has follow through and all that kind of thing is definitely critical. But I also think you only get where you get in a career or in life because of the help of those around you. And you have to spend time nurturing those relationships. And I think that also ties into the asking for help. So sometimes you have to sort of put the screen time and the time in front of the Excel spreadsheet aside and focus on the time in front of people and finding out about them and opportunities and what they've learned.
Yeah. No, that's a great piece of advice, especially that networking part. I think is a lot of things that young people need to really put some time and attention into, and kind of outside of just their bubble of where they work.
Absolutely, and I think it's hard to do because you want to be delivering on what you're expected to do at work, and you want to be successful in work, but you do have to carve out and make it a priority.
And in terms of factors that you have noticed that affect employees in the workplace today, what would you say you've seen kind of through your career, maybe touching on some of these points that you just mentioned about networking and advancement?
I think there's more of a focus on it. I think that, companies are recognizing that they have to pull up the next generation of leaders and investing in leadership, and I think that's critical at a more junior level. I also worked in investment banking for many years where there was a very big lack of work-life balance, so I think with more millennials coming into the workforce, that's shifting, and there is more of a recognition that you need some downtime to be able to be high-functioning on time. So I think that's changed. And I think also we have, luckily more diversity coming into the workforce, which I think is great, whether that's gender diversity, which I tick that box on, or other elements of diversity. It's good to have different perspectives. And I think it's becoming, it's clearly become a priority, and I think we're starting to make some good positive steps in that direction.
Awesome. So really you're talking about succession planning and allowing for an environment that's adapting to kind of the younger generation who are a bit more diverse and making them feel like they're included in the workplace.
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to switch gears for a moment. I want to share some interesting information with you. According to the latest Stats Canada census report, 82% of the Canadian population live in large and medium-sized centres across the country, one of the highest concentrations among G7 nations. Also, according to the 2016 Matrix Canadian Real Estate and Diversity Workplace Survey, in Ontario, 52% of the population in urban centres are female, yet less than 34% of women are in leadership positions. And in Ontario, between 35 and 54% of the working population in urban centres identify as visible minorities, yet less than 25% of them are in leadership positions. So with some of that information, what are some of the challenges you have witnessed over the course of your career that affect these identified groups, women, racialized groups, regarding their access to opportunity and advancement into leadership?
Well, I guess given who I am, I can speak most personally and intimately about being a woman in a male-dominated industry. It's a difficult question to answer because I think I've done relatively well and I've had a great career and I've had, so many great men that I've worked with, and mostly I have only worked with men, have been very, very supportive. So for me personally, I think things have changed a lot. I started out working on Bay Street at a very small shop that was like working in a locker room. And at the time, there was pre-Me Too movement. You had to suck it up and deal with it and move on. So you had to be a little tough. And so I think I think we've evolved beyond that. Unfortunately, we haven't done as great of a job at seeing more women rise into senior positions. And I think that's really unfortunate. I think part of it is structural. Sometimes, I was talking with someone who gave an example that at their firm, they were expected to be at a 7 a.m. meeting with all of the senior members of the team. And she said, I just can't do that because she's the one who's taking care of the children. So I don't think that that's anyone deciding that they want to exclude women. But I think that sometimes in subtle ways, you end up not part of the informal networks. And I think that that goes for a lot of people from other minority groups. So maybe it's not maybe some of the initiatives that have been well-intentioned are not working as well as they should. But I also think that if you are part of a minority group, my view is you have an obligation to pay it forward. So I do try as much as possible to support, people who, young women who reach out to me looking for advice. I think that's part of it, is that for people who are coming into an environment where they don't seem to fit in or look like the group that's there, just having that one person who's succeeded and has done it makes it a lot easier for the people who are coming up behind them.
Yeah, like seeing a role model, especially
Exactly.
if they're willing to mentor you or give you some guidance.
Absolutely.
Makes life a lot easier.
There's those overlaps and those connections that are maybe easier to make with someone who has a similar background to you, and I think that is very helpful in terms of the informal networking that's required to move up in a career.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunities for overlap for people who are a little bit different, even to learn from one another.
Yes, and I also think that, going back to my comments earlier about things that I wish I had learned when I was 20, having a bit of a sense of humor. I think at certain parts of my career I did feel excluded, but I don't think that the people around me felt that that's what they were doing. So part of it is, if you are a little bit different, it's also your obligation to hold out the torch and make the effort to reach out to people and insert yourself into those groups.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the accountability that's a two-way street for both
Absolutely.
parties to try to find a common ground, but for both people to listen to one another so that you can find that common ground.
Yeah.
Okay. If you were going to recommend to other leaders in our industry who are interested in creating more inclusive work environments in their companies, what would be some of the things that you would talk to them about?
That's a really tough question. I think it's important to ask the employees themselves. There's been so much talk about women in whether it's real estate or in finance, and I can say honestly that in my entire 20-something year career, I don't think I was ever approached once internally to be asked about what my experience was like. It would be more in these kind of situations, mentor lunches, things like that. But actually internally, I think maybe we're not asking the right questions and just going to the people who are, if you have a target group of people that you want to bring in and you have some of those people on your team, empowering them to talk about their challenges or how they think things could be improved, I think would probably be the best plan of action.
Yeah, creating like a two-way street, two-way conversation where people can actually share their voice and then people actually listen to it. Great. When you think about the future of the workplace, what excites you, or what kind of experiences are you maybe personally looking forward to as the industry evolves?
I think the real estate industry has been very exciting and dynamic. So I think we've, as was mentioned earlier here today, we've matured. So I'm looking forward to seeing this sort of next leg. We've had 25 years of REITs in Canada. The next 25 years will get more sophisticated. I think technology is going to be an interesting element of that as well.
Awesome. So just to reiterate, the Real Stories Leadership Series was established to showcase the insight and wisdom of real estate leaders. And just to conclude, I have a couple of final questions for you. What footprint would you like to leave as your legacy in the business community?
Oh my! I didn't even think that's a hard one to even think about. I hope that over the course of my career, I've added some insights in terms of the research and the transactions that I've executed. And as a leader, I hope that I've contributed to helping the next generation of leaders move into their spots as their careers progresses.
That sounds really great. And as the last question, what is one word that you would use to capture the essence of who you are as a leader?
I'd say passionate is probably the fairest encapsulation.
Perfect. Yeah, you could definitely see that while you spoke today. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for such an engaging conversation. On behalf of Matrix360 and Informa Canada, we appreciate you taking time to share your perspective and experience with us today. If you would like to learn more about Matrix360 or Informa Canada, please check us out on our website. Thank you so much. Thank you, Heather.